Last year there were riots all around Britain. They spread like wildfire from one area to another. So I went to one area of London called Hackney, where there were plenty of riots. And I spoke to local residents who were there. And here is the first person I met whom I could ask questions about the riots.
I think the area is quite depressed. It has been for quite a long time. I think a lot of the youth, they can't get work opportunities. It's very frustrating. I think there's antagonism built up against the police over time. The police in Hackney haven't always had the best reputation in the past.
British riots have a long history. Most famous in recent times are the poll tax riots, the largest being in 1990. Which led to a Conservative government withdrawing this taxation policy. The people has said no, and the centre of London had many fires burning. Also, under Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister, she attacked the strength of the trade unions, and the Union of Coal Miners had a reputation for being the strongest in the land, capable of bringing down governments. And although the strike of the miners went on for months with many demonstrations and some with violence, they lost the battle. The government froze all their funds, and there was total infiltration by plainclothes police and other saboteurs, as well as the government importing coal from abroad. Organised labour in Britain got weakened and, if you like, taken out one union at a time. The print workers, the TV workers, all had to adjust to the new laissez-faire economic policies, which were simply unbridled capitalism. Britain's history also contains many revolts. When 19th century industry first created factories, the rural people reacted and formed the Luddite movement, because their rural life was threatened by the lure of wages in factories and in the cities. They would go into the factories and smash all the equipment. They were against progress and for tradition. And to this day, the word Luddite can be used to describe a person or their attitude. In 1984, some anarchists with an ideology chose to create a carnival atmosphere as a protest in the capitalist banking centre of London. Many people came from all over the country, mostly youth. 30 years ago, the times were not as tetchy or oppressive as they are now. But this Stop the City protest was to be repeated a few times over the last 3 decades. The city is the word used to describe the British banking area. It seems each time the police are a little more heavy-handed. There are rampant rumours of electromagnetic waves being used to sedate the people. The police are all too often psyched up to be violent, and to see the protesters as villains. The police are constantly using a practice called kettling, where everyone is cordoned off into an enclosed area, often for many hours, without even access to a toilet or drinking water. This practice has been taken to many British courts and also the European Court. When the kettling is condemned, the government appeals the decision. In the latest Stop the City protest, one person was killed, Ian Tomlinson, and the police denied all knowledge of any wrongdoing. But within days a video showed up which showed the victim had been a passerby who was assaulted by a policeman. The Arab Spring has had an undocumented influence on the disaffected in Britain. In March last year, after a national and popular demonstration against the cuts, thousands of youth tried to occupy Trafalgar Square. But the police were at the ready, with hundreds of them prepared to stop any camping out in Trafalgar Square. A lot of the youth at the forefront of those demonstrations are truly disaffected. No hope of employment, no hope of creative fulfillment, no hope of having a worthwhile existence. Consequently, we see alcohol and unsavory types. But ironically, these are the very people who can trigger an organized resistance. Of course, it would take the middle class to make a real difference. As I was walking down the street, I saw a young man. He didn't seem to be full of employment or opportunities, so I asked him about the riots.
I was in Kingston Road, where they drove all the bins out and
So there was trouble where you were?
Yeah, there was a lot of trouble. To be honest with you, I was with a black friend of mine, and I didn't really feel safe. The police made the presence known. They didn't get out the car. There was lots of lads with hoodies on bikes, like in gangs. Like, it seemed like it was orchestrated, but it wasn't really. It was just organised chaos, really.
At all times, the greatest risk in these protests are the ever-present agent provocateurs. They are prepared with everything from sound bombs to causing all forms of violence. This then justifies a heavy police crackdown. The ripples of discontent manifesting in these riots are increasing in frequency. And while Britain is still a welfare state, and most people can expect to be minimally fed, and have a roof of some sort, there are increasing numbers finding themselves homeless, and their lives meaningless, with no real opportunity to gain a thank you from another person. The government has instituted laws curtailing the use of the internet in times of strife to stop the organization of protest, and has mercilessly prosecuted those who have promoted protests on the internet as incitement to violence. The courts have also made harsh convictions on those who have stolen goods from shops damaged in the riots. Also, the only example the disaffected youth have of a government is one that is constantly championing humanitarian intervention, which means bombing people of another culture and justifying it by saying it is for the resources. Perhaps we also need to consider the mass immigration that has taken place, creating a society without a common heritage, where few families remain intact, and many a person's sole cultural guidance is through a decadent mass media. Recent years have shown a huge increase in immigration from the countries Britain is bombing, refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Libya. With such huge proportions of these countries' populations being made into refugees, there should be the suspicion that this too was part of the war aims, to increase assimilation.
Black people are just fed up, basically, and we have no voice, especially the black man at the end of the day, because black men personally face a lot of pressures.
To prevent further disturbances, the government needs to consider the example it is setting through its funding and pursuing wars of conquest. The youth, and indeed all citizens, need opportunities to fulfill their potential and receive some recognition for their efforts. But really, these objectives seem impossible for as long as Britain is mortgaged to private financial institutions. The financial institutions are motivated by profit and have no concern for homegrown anything, which means it is capitalism which is creating the trouble.